Hi, my name is Simone Williams, and welcome to Art Like Everything Else, the podcast, Season 2. So this season, we're going to be doing things a bit differently, but let's go ahead and get started. So I want to start off with a question. Have you ever felt despair? So, the dictionary defines it. So, to be overcome by a sense of futility or defeat. So have you ever felt despair? So like the type of despair that oftentimes can feel all-consuming. So like in the face of these like everyday expectations to live and keep going on like nothing is wrong. And you know what? If you answered yes, I'm sure you're not alone. And if you just know, let's look at what that might look like. So I actually wanted to start with a painting. So this painting is by Edward Hopper. So this painting is by Edward Hopper. Edward Hopper is an American realist painter. So what the painting we're looking at right now is called the Automat. So this is a beautifully and brightly colored painting. It uses greens, yellows, and blues. It's a painting that depicts a woman that's staring into her cup of what I'm assuming is coffee. She's sitting and like staring into her coffee. There's a small empty plate in front of her, and then like she's clutching the saucer of her coffee with like a gloved hand, and then she's like holding the coffee, like the cup of coffee, in like her bare hand, and it's almost like she's so lost in thought that like she forgot to take off both of her gloves. And so like honestly, like when I saw this painting, I kind of like felt like she could very much well be like experiencing the type of despair that we kind of defined earlier. But like the type of despair that like might have you lost in thought, even like when you're trying to go about and do things. But with this, when looking at this, I got curious and I was like, what could she potentially be despairing about when it comes to like the time period she's likely in? And so this painting was actually released in February of 1927. So now, like, what are some things that might have been going on in the early 1920s that we could potentially cause this woman to be so lost in thought? Like, what could be despairing her so is something I thought to myself. And so I'm gonna share with you some of the things I've learned. So like in the early 1920s, that was the ending of the pandemic status of the Spanish flu, where over 50 million people died worldwide. And so this was a very prominent flu during that time. Like that was definitely a very scary time back in the 1920s, 1910s, while this was happening. And while it is said to have ended in 1920, the virus actually continued to mutate and affects people to this day. So 2024, it affects people to this day. There was the Osage Indian murders that occurred during this time. There were multiple race massacres. So like there was the Tulsa race massacre and quite a few other race massacres. There were a lot of work strikes. So there were a lot of coal mining strikers. There are even coal mining strikers who were killed. Prohibition was happening around this time. Women didn't have a lot of rights. This is a woman in the painting, so like that's very well could be something that has her lost in thought as well, like not having a lot of rights. And that's just thinking about only some of the tragedies. That's not even considering like even like personal tragedies she might be experiencing. Like she could have lost family, she could have experienced loss in general that may not be like loss in the like in a sense of death, but like loss of opportunities. Again, like she didn't have a lot of rights as a woman, so like loss of freedom maybe even. And then like also like during this time, there was also a lot of new things happening. And so, like, there are also all of these kind of societal or, like, even community expectations you might be experiencing. Like, there were new radio shows, there were new movies, there were new films, there was theater productions that were all created during this time. And so, like, there was, amidst all of this tragedy, amidst all of these things, bad things that were kind of happening, all of these new things were also happening, and there was also a lot of change. Like, there were a few, like, baseball, like, stadiums that were, like, constructed during this time, like theaters, new theaters constructed during this time. Almost just like new mediums of entertainment kind of came up during this time. And so, like, there's a lot of things changing kind of around this, our subject in this painting as well. And so, like, it is actually fairly easy to see just how one might be lost in thought when it comes to this, our subject. Like, they might be lost in, just overcome with so much despair that's kind of just expected to be ignored. And so you see them staring into their cup of coffee, forgetting to even take off both of their gloves. But they're just sitting there and they're staring. And they're feeling all that it is that they're feeling. Now, that was the 1920s. And I thought it was actually really interesting how I do feel like a lot of those same feelings can be felt and reflected even today. So, like, it might look different, but a lot of that is kind of the same today. So I actually wanted to share with you all another art piece. So this is a poem by Vinay Krishnan. So it is called "There is Laundry to Do and a Genocide to Stop." There's laundry to do and a genocide to stop. I have to eat better and also avoid a plague. My rent went up $150. I'll need to pick up more shifts. 20 people died in Rafah this morning, and every major news outlet is stretching the limits of passive voice to suggest whole families may have leaped up through the air at missiles that otherwise had the right of way. I just got a notification that my student loan payments are starting up again and my phone isn't charged. My cousin got COVID for a fourth time and can no longer work or walk or even feed himself. The person across from me on the L train seems to fashion themselves a punk rock revolutionary, but they're not wearing a face mask, and that's the kind of cognitive dissonance that makes me want to steal batteries. Fascists keep winning primaries for both parties, and I think I gained a few pounds. The CDC just announced there are no more speed limits on highways, and I think this Ativan is finally hitting. The NYPD farmers market only sells bad apples. Have you heard that one? Listen, it's warm today. Too warm for March, but I don't have time to think through the implications because there's laundry to do and a genocide to stop. I really thought that was a very poignant, I believe the word is, or just a very good poem that I felt like kind of can also encapsulate that despair we were talking about the subject in the previous painting might have been feeling, but as it would be when it comes to now. I thought it was really interesting how, especially in doing the research of all the stuff that was kind of happening around the 1920s, I thought it was really interesting how many things are actually relatively similar. Like, there are a lot of strikes happening now. We are experiencing, or we are witnessing, several different genocides that are occurring. So in South Sudan, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Palestine, and in several other countries across the globe. Like, we're currently in an ongoing pandemic in a country that is doing as little as possible to keep their citizens safe. We're living in a place that is kind of hell-bent on making as many police states as possible. There's an increasing cost of living. There's a growing homelessness problem. There's a devaluing of labor and the people who do the work to keep going. Then there's also all of the change that is kind of happening. Like, we're currently during a time where we have candidates who are hoping to be elected, who are not listening to their constituents. Women, even now, are losing rights to governments who aspire to take away their rights, to reduce as many rights as possible. We are... What else? I mentioned the strikes. Like, there are so many things. And then there's also all of the new things. Like, there are so many new things that are also happening. So many things. So much change that is also happening even now in 2024 that we're kind of expected to just, like, hop on board of and be, like, embrace and take part in. And it's not hard to understand the despair that many people might be experiencing today. Like, especially kind of in this expectation to keep moving and going forward as if we're not at all affected by what we are, like, witnessing and experiencing on the daily. For example, honestly, so, like, I found that poem on Twitter, and when I saw it, like, there's a lot of people who I follow who is like, this kind of really encapsulates, like, the despair that they have been feeling for a while now, of, like, this expectation to keep going. Like, we're not seeing the images that are coming out of the Congo, the images that are coming out of Palestine, the images that are coming out of Sudan, the images that are coming out of all of these other countries experiencing genocide, that we're not seeing all of these people and all of these organizations having to strike to be paid a livable wage, to be paid, that we're not seeing this increase in homelessness, this increase in police states, this increase in just everything, and, like, expect it to act as though none of that actually going to matter, or none of that's going to be of much use for us to, like, consider or think about. We're just kind of expected to be like these cogs in the machine. And a lot of people kind of agreed. A lot of people that I saw, that I personally follow, talked about how they agreed with that poem, and they connected to that particular poem. And then it's also just, it had a lot of retweets and, like, quote tweets that kind of also talked about how much they enjoy, how much they felt seen by that particular piece of art, which I thought was really, really cool. And so, but yeah, like, I want to talk about a bit more. Just in doing my research for this particular episode, I did find it interesting how similar so much of the things that kind of, so much of the despair that we've been feeling is not new, in that a lot of that despair is likely despair that has been felt before. And I felt like this particular painting by Edward Hopper, on the Automat, I felt like it was a really good painting that could almost at least capture that feeling. At least for me, it captured that feeling of despair, of, like, just being lost in thought, trying to go through the motions, but, like, just maybe, like, not quite being able to get all the way through it. But, like, it was really interesting. It's kind of how the feeling's not new. And that's something that I think is really cool when it comes to art. And that's something actually I'm hoping to explore going forward. And that's kind of how I'm planning to switch up the format for my podcast going forward. It's kind of just exploring the art that shows us just how not alone we are when it comes to the things we feel, the things we experience, things we witness, the things we bear witness to. So often we are led to believe that what I'm feeling now is something that, like, only I have ever felt. But you see a painting from almost 100 years ago, and it's like, I have felt like that before. You see a poem, you read a poem that may have just come out last month, but that is how I'm feeling. And the same can be said for all kinds of art. So I'm actually really, really excited to explore that going forward, just the ways in which art has a way of letting you know that you're not alone in how you're feeling and in what you're witnessing and in what it is that you're seeing, that like these things have happened before, these feelings have been felt before. The essence of a lot of things, this is not the very first time it's kind of existed. And so that is something I'm actually really excited about exploring when it comes to art. So yeah, people have been facing this particular type of despair for years, and it's really evident that because there were a lot more pieces of art that I felt like could capture that kind of despair that I talked about during this episode, but the Automat, that one kind of stuck out to me the most. And so yeah, I thought the Automat and the There's Laundry to Do and the Genocide to Stop poem by Vinay Krishnan. Like, there's art to kind of depict that. But yeah, what I think it's something we can kind of take from it is that, like, it is okay that we feel this way, because we are not alone in feeling this way. And we have not been alone in feeling this way for many, many, many years. So maybe despair is also, too, can be in art like everything else. I have a new closeout kind of segment that I want to try. And so this is kind of just art that made me think this week. Or in this case, it's not, I guess in its own way, I would consider it art, but I'm not sure how other people would kind of define it. But something I actually learned, or at least got to see, was the concept of mourning stationery. So mourning as in mourning. There was a point in time where mourning stationery was a thing. And so it was like paper envelopes with a black border. And I saw the tweet. If I can find the tweet, I will actually put it up here for sure. But on that tweet, it said, "It is so lovely to be like, every single part of my life is full of grief, even the paper I'm writing on." And I thought, like, that has kind of been something that I think has been really important. At least for me, I wish people got the chance to kind of be in grief more. I think it was actually pretty cool that there exists a point in time where, like, mourning clothes was a thing. You were giving at least some time to kind of mourn, and it was known, like, by everyone just by looking at you, like, by looking at the stationery you use. You were known to be in mourning, and so people could kind of treat you accordingly. Granted, I do think grief kind of looks different for a lot of people. In my own personal thing, sometimes I do feel like you never really stop grieving, but that might be a topic for another episode. But yeah, I think it's really cool that the concept of mourning clothes, mourning stationery was a thing, a way to let everybody know, like I feel sad, and like this sadness is likely affecting me to this, like, in this moment. And so, like, because, like, often we are not okay. And, like, everybody and their mom will absolutely say that it is okay to not be okay. But in the society we live in, we are often, it feels like we are rushed to act as though everything is fine, even when they're not. And, like, we are rushed to be okay again in the face of everything that's kind of happening. And quite frankly, I do feel like that can kind of contribute to, like, the despair that we were talking about earlier, in that, like, we are expected to be a-okay. We are expected to be just fine. But there existed a time where it was okay that you weren't, and you got to let that be seen and known, even through just the letters you wrote to people. And I thought that was really cool. But yeah, that's all I have for you today. Be sure to like, subscribe, drop a comment. Let me know what you think of this episode and of this new direction that I'm planning on going in. If you have any topics you might be interested in, feel free to drop them in the comments. But yeah, that's all I have. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being. Have a good day. Bye.